Okay, well, I think we probably should get started now, and I think we have a quorum. Okay, well, welcome to the Northwest Weather Workshop, everyone. Obviously, we have to do it online this year. We're going to start with a few words from Logan Johnson, who's the head of the National Weather Service office here in Seattle. So, Logan, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, thanks, Cliff. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this year's edition of the Pacific Northwest Weather Workshop. A little bit different this year, of course, but you know, we're happy to be able to get something together after we had to sort of cancel everything last year. So, Cliff, thanks for your work getting this together this year. A lot of behind the scenes stuff had to be done by Cliff this year. We have some limitations on Zoom from our end, so we really appreciate you hosting it and putting it together. And looking forward to a real successful program this year. A little bit shorter format than years past, but you know, I think will still be something good and useful for everybody who's here. So thanks again for coming. This is a part where I normally tell you where the bathrooms are, but guess that won't be applicable this year. So that's about all I have. So take it away, Cliff.
Great. You know, one thing I should mention that the meeting has always been sponsored by three groups: the University of Washington, the National Weather Service, and the American Meteorological Society. And this year, the Portland chapter is sponsoring it as well. So we have a three-way sponsorship. Now, the whole idea about this meeting is to bring together people interested in Northwest weather, both professionals and people that are just interested. I just want to mention a little bit about how this thing's structured, and I'm gonna share my screen here so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen if you can't complain. You know, basically this is going to be a shorter meeting. Normally it's a day and a half, but because it's Zoom, we're just making it a half a day. The morning session is going to be on regional wildfires, a little bit about the impacts, a little bit about history, and about the meteorology. And then the second session, we'll be talking about West Coast meteorology. So we should wrap it up somewhere around noon. And we're going to end with a great video from Greg Johnson of Skunk Bay Weather. He creates the most wonderful meteorological videos, and you'll see that later on. Well, there's no reason we can't get started, but I first want to see if there's any questions from the group at all. Any logistical issues? Everybody can see what's on the screen right now and hear me? No problems? Okay. During each talk, if you want to make a comment, you can do that. You can either use the chat capability, and I'll put it on my screen here. There's the chat capability, and you can also make a comment. They're on the reaction thing. You can click on that, put your hand up, and we'll call on you. So maybe the chat's probably the easiest thing. You can type in a question, and then one of us will read it off. Okay. Any comments, any questions before we get started? And I don't have to tell you where the bathroom is. And we don't have any of the snacks that we normally do. Okay. Well, the first talk today is going to be by Michael Fagan of West Coast Weather. He's going to talk about wildfires and the impacts on the wine regions of Napa and the Sonoma Valleys. And I'm going to stop sharing right now, and I'm going to open up to him to take over the screen. Okay, why don't we get started again? Welcome back, everybody. Since there's a lot of interest in the fires in the western side of the Cascade Crest, we're lucky that we have a talk by Bob Zybach, who's going to talk about Western Oregon fire history. And go ahead, Bob.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. My topic is Western Oregon fire history, including prescribed burning and catastrophic wildfires, such as what we had last year on Labor Day. There's a fire triangle that's kind of famous. You people are the experts on weather. My topic is fuels. You could have topography is a given, and a source of ignition is critical. So one source we have is volcanoes in the Pacific Northwest. This drawing was made in 1847, eyewitness account. resulted in fires on the north side of Mount St. Helens that resulted in second growth Douglas fir that Weyerhaeuser logged off after World War II. So early record of fires from volcanoes, lightning fires. Quite often these are called natural fires for some reason. This is the pattern across Oregon in 1992 to 96, but it's the same as in the 1920s and 30s. And if you'll notice, in the Coast Range, Western Oregon, there's hardly any lightning strikes. In fact, all of Northwest Oregon. I studied that area for my PhD dissertation, the fire history. These were some of the greatest fires in history have occurred. We hear about Indian burning and it's presented like this, some kind of out of control wildfire event, entirely imaginary, and on the front page of a national forestry journal. Here's a drawing, 1841, of the Monroe area, and you can see that burning actually removes most of the fuels around where people live through firewood gathering and so on. You see a couple of Douglas fir trees in the background. This whole area now is covered with Douglas fir that invaded the valley since the ending of Indian burning. So why did the Indians burn? Well, firewood gathering and burning for heating, cooking, lighting. That's a daily basis. Patch burning, such as filberts and salmonberry and huckleberry to rejuvenate desired food plants and fiber plants, and broadcast burning, clearing out large areas for hunting and so on. So the Indians also used large timbers and logs. We don't usually recognize this. They had ships that could go out onto the ocean. They had large lodges that could hold dozens of people, several families. They had split cedar housing. So this is a little bit different from the teepees or living around the campfire picture we get. And yet there were a lot of large trees in the area. They were measured. This is 1841 Wilkes expedition up by Astoria. There are some spruce trees down in Lincoln County. And a lot of that's been followed up by logging or wildfire. So going back to the 1885 drawing, here's the Yaquina burn near Mary's Peak. And we can see the remnants of widely spaced snags. People would say they were old growth. Other people would say they're just large second growth, but the main thing is the spacing between them. Here's 1894 in the Elliott State Forest, and we can see results of two burns, probably about 1840 and then 1868 or 1879. This slide formed a lake, but it also tells the story of stocking with younger trees at denser stands, and then seedlings getting started before the landslide. And here's the Yaquina burn east of Newport. And it's the same thing. We have an Indian prairie in here that didn't burn. We've got scattered wider snags, 200 or 300-year-old trees. And then we got understory trees growing up in a denser pattern. So we can see that these results all through the 1800s are well documented. The 1933 August fire, Tillamook fire, first one of the 6-year jinx that was followed up by 39, 45, and 1951 fires, occurred on an east wind, very similar to the 2020 Labor Day fires this year, but more isolated. It wasn't over the entire state. So if we look at the fire history, if we look to the right of this map of the Coast Range, that's the Willamette River on the right. That yellow there is open prairie and savanna. The blue is fog belt spruce. That's where we saw the big trees. And all of the bright red, pink, orange, hatched are burns, massive fires, most of the Douglas fir area. And then the green areas are second growth and old growth. So we can see distinct patterns between the east and west slopes of the Coast Range, and between where Indian burning occurred and where catastrophic wildfires occurred. So we look at the wind patterns when these occur. They all occur, all the major fires, in August and September. There's been no change in that in probably 250 years, but 150 years we can document. South fires or south winds, I was working with a meteorologist, so he calls them southwesters, produce a Columbus Day storm, and they can be pretty severe. Westerly winds bring in water from the ocean, they quell fires and stop them. All of the major fires are east wind events, and usually August or September. This time of year we can have them, but there's no fuels, or things are pretty darn green. So we can predict fires based on historical weather and wildfire patterns. We can base it on land ownership patterns, and I'll show you that in an instant. And it's based on current fuel loads, structures, and locations. They all occur on an east wind. Global warming doesn't seem to be any factor in the last 50 years or 500 years. So using those predictive criteria in 1994, in a national publication, I said, if we don't do something about the active management of our land, we're going to have more and severe fires. That prediction came true. Here's 1994 or so, somewhere through here. And we can see that that was a pretty easy prediction to be made, had nothing to do with weather. Well, other than regular weather, east winds in August and September. Here's the Bose fire from 2008. And you can see the remnants of Indian prairie have not burnt. In the 1920s, most of this area was prairie and it burnt. And then it reseeded in with Douglas fir, which created the fuel load, but it didn't cover the entire prairie. And so the Douglas fir burnt. And that's the pattern we see now. Here's the 2020 Labor Day fires. Here's the fires we've been looking at all along Western Oregon. Highly unusual. This was the most severe catastrophic wildfire events in state history if we don't include human mortality. Most of these fires have been starting in and including wilderness, U.S. Forest Service, and BLM ONC lands. Those are the federal lands that have been essentially the starting points and fuel loads for the fires. But we've had state lands, industrial lands, tree farms and ranches, and residential and vacation properties that were heavily involved during this last year. So in conclusion, catastrophic fires are bad. Regular landscape scale prescribed burns, as exemplified by Indian burning, can significantly reduce the likelihood and severity of modern wildfire risks. Fuel levels must be greatly reduced before prescribed fires can be safely and effectively reintroduced in the environment. The fires we had last year had tons of fuel. This year, there's even more. Despite all of the salvage logging, all of those green trees that were filled with water are now filled with pitch, and they're air-dried firewood. So as with the Kalmiopsis wilderness, Yaquina fires, Tillamook burn, reburns can be, often are worse than the original fire. So now we've got a greater fire danger, more fuel than we did a year ago. So removing dead trees and shrubs and invasive conifers allows for this safe, effective reintroduction of prescribed fire and planting. And if this step is taken, we will greatly reduce future risk and severity. So final note, landscape restoration, that seems to be a common theme. It seems to be that humans are pathogens from much of the perspective on this, that you get people out, you passively manage the area, you remove the roads, you create artificial wilderness and critical habitat designations. Those quickly build up with fuels, and they're atypical. People have been here for thousands of years. So restoring a landscape, from my perspective, means restoring people to the land where they've been excluded. And the lands where they've been excluded have become predictably the sources of our worst fires. I'm ready for questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that really interesting historical perspective. We do have some questions. Virginia Rux asks, are there statistics about how many of these are started, the fires that we've seen in the region started by arson versus naturally occurring?
Yes, in the Coast Range, all of the fires are started by people. There was one fire started this last year by arson. Most fires are started by lightning. Most of the seriously bad fires are started by people. A small percentage of that are arson. Mostly it's arcing power lines, untended campfires, kids playing with matches, careless smokers, backfiring engines. There's all kinds of ways that people can start fires, and arson used to be a lot more popular in the 1920s. Sometimes they say it's still going on in reservations and areas to make work projects, but for the most part, it's a minor factor.
Thank you. Yeah. Thurman Gillespie asks, what is the impact of pine bark beetles on the fuel levels in the forest?
It's the same as a fire. There's been a lot of discussion on this, but also some pretty clear results. Once the trees have been killed, pine and Douglas fir have a lot of pitch. And when they're alive, they've got a lot of water. And so if the beetles kill the pine or fire kills the pine, it creates a serious firewood buildups per acre. So having beetles kill the pine creates a worsening fire hazard.
Pete Parsons asks, how much of this problem have we created via years of fire suppression policy?
I don't think fire suppression is given too much credit. We really couldn't start suppressing fires until after World War II. After World War II, we were also actively managing our lands once we had airplanes and everything, and fire lookouts and good cameras, but actively manage the land, suppress the fires. We only had one major fire from 52 to 87. If we could suppress fires, we would have done it last year or 2018. The problem is passive management almost entirely on federal lands, allowing the fuels to build up and these predictable events to take place on an east wind.
Okay. Nicole asks, can you give an example of an invasive conifer?
Douglas fir, it's native, but a lot of the prairies in that have been invaded by Douglas fir. I showed a picture of one and didn't explain it much, but Douglas fir are invading areas that had been kept open and away from fir for thousands of years in many areas. And so that's created a real fire hazard. It's invasive on a local space basis, but as far as exotic conifers, they're not much of a factor.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, Bob. Very much appreciated.